Well, so welcome everybody. We're so happy that you made the time to Sting Talk. We are very happy and very grateful to have the chance to talk with Brenda, Shubhangi, and also all of you about making space and taking space. My name is Eva. I am part of the organizing team of Feminist Futures Helsinki. And this is the second event of our public talk series. It's going to be, you'll see about many different things that relate to spaces, but maybe overall about how people, you as a person with your body, can also counter resistance and make yourself seen in public spaces, and how play and loitering can become a part of resistance in public spaces. We're going to record this event, and what it means is that it will be recorded like the person who speaks, and then we'll upload it to YouTube. So in the end, if you want to speak, but then you don't wish to be in the video, you can just let us know and we'll just take that part out. And first, we'll listen a bit from Shubhangi and her work, then we'll move on to Brenda, and finally we'll just open a discussion among ourselves. And also, we're super interested in hearing what you as an audience think. So please leave comments and questions in the chat, because we'd love to pick them up later. And it's now my honor to introduce Shubhangi. She is an awesome visual artist and filmmaker. Her work is in contemporary politics, and I'm going to take this now. Yeah, so she's very interested in how the production and reproduction of everyday material interconnect. Her work is in several types of media, from static text to moving images and installation. And she usually draws upon existing knowledge that relates to the body, to identity, and also how gendered bodies and their relationship to public spaces. She holds a master's degree in visual cultures, curating and contemporary art from Aalto University. And she's also the co-founder of New City Limits, which is an initiative to facilitate creative viewing and practice in Navi Mumbai in India. Now she's in Helsinki, also like us, working and living. So Shubhangi, we're so much looking forward to hear a bit from your work. So please, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you so much for that introduction and for the invite. And let me just share my screen. I am really looking forward to this conversation with Brenda. I think there's going to be a lot for me to learn from it. So let's just dive straight into it. I hope everybody's able to take a little bit of time to sit back and listen to my voice. Having grown up in Bombay, now Mumbai, public spaces back home seem like quotidian battleground, where very few emerge unscathed. With all 7 shades of sexual violence on display, women who do surface on the other side are often mired in war marks, coarse, crusty, skin toughened, fangs sharpened, but enriched always in practical survival tips for others like themselves, each telling the other how to survive by collectively adapting to the everyday violence. As a young girl growing into a woman's body, I had often imagined building myself a body shield, a collapsible metal wire bird cage-like enclosure, which when worn above my clothes would add a layer of protection from straying hands in crowded spaces where I'm unable to fully protect myself, thus making my body morbidly visible and yet comically inaccessible. Making a draft or two in my head, finding loopholes in its design, has only urged me right back to the drawing board, making versions and updating it. I do never intend to wear these armors that I design and plan. And I hope that no one ever has to. The places we live is not only influenced by us, but is also affected by our contact with it. The shared landscape, far from being static, as we know, is in a constant state of flux, caused by agents such as ourselves, responsible in building, reframing, and breaking existing structures. So while the streets hold the possibility of being a site where social hegemony is exerted, it is also a ground for study. It's a fertile ground for study. It's a space for micropolitics. They are locations of where existing social hierarchies can be viewed as well as experienced. One's bodies and its mobility in cities are matters of public and urgent inquiry within the larger context of how public spaces can be developed or reviewed for gender and racial inclusivity. It does not take long for certain minorities in cities, gender and caste in India, racial and class in Finland, to realize how coded public spaces really are. The position which these individuals then hold in these spaces may as well be one of being mere travelers, where we are simply transiting, never staying. But this does not mean that it also has to stay that way. Spaces can be influenced through sustained engagement, can be trained to include, paths rethreaded. For instance, loitering to reclaim one's right in public spaces. This term loitering, brought to India through its colonial legacy, has since expanded in definition within social as well as domestic spaces. The irony of this invisibility in public spaces are matters that can be located within existing feminist actions that call for assertion and visibility of marginalized bodies in public spaces to resist existing social and gender hegemony. By the act of women occupying public spaces and visibly doing, well, nothing, they're asserting their right to safety, to leisure, and visibility in the shared public domain. Taking a cue from academics and feminist writers, Shilpa Farke, Samira Khan, and Shilpa Ranade, where in their seminal work, Why Loiter?, they write about the importance of loitering as a tool for women to reclaim public spaces. Meet to Sleep and I Never Asked for It, undertaken by Blank Noise, a feminist action collective in India, has rhizomatically grown over time, examining women's position in streets and subsequently within the social structures of society. Over the years, what's happened is pockets of women have been coming out onto the streets with an intent to address this imbalance of visibility and gender disparity in public spaces with the focus of reducing the excessive everyday violence. And they're doing this by simply being present, by loitering to reclaim the streets and therefore forcing visibilities in spaces that have otherwise been cordoned off to them by these invisible force fields. Meet to Sleep, for instance, invites women to come to parks or any other open spaces that they may find in order to sleep, to nap, to rest, and to visibly do nothing. This may appear counterintuitive, but by lowering their guards and exhibiting a sense of trust in the other, they are denouncing their fears and exercising their right to safety. By occupying these spaces, the women are now becoming a new and regular visual in the parks. The politics of leisure, however, defies social order that parameterizes individuals as contributing members of society. The acceptance of women in public spaces, or the lack thereof, has historical distortions encased in the language of patriarchy, reiteration of power, through social order subjugation. Pakistan-based collective Girls at Dhabas turn the idea of women, or where women of decent reputation can be seen at, on its head. By inviting groups of women and men to places normally habituated by men alone, such as roadside tea stalls called dhabas, Girls at Dhabas reject the doctrine of women staying excluded from certain spaces within the city and challenge the myth of spaces being strictly confined to the possession of one gender alone. So while interacting with the space through a multitude of ways, Girls at Dhabas eventually hope to open the landscape for their presence in it, to be viewed not as an anomaly that appears to have fallen within the cracks of society, but rather to be perceived as a regular and everyday detail within this diverse social landscape. This is a simple act of subversion that is served hot on the side of dissent. But as much loitering is an act of resistance, it is equally a way to reclaim leisure. I have been walking the streets in India and then here in Finland. It is where anonymity meets identity, and I am interested in this complex petri dish of human interaction. In an Hannah Arendt way of looking at publics, social, and common, meaning that publics are formed only in the presence of others, which also means that one's understanding of the self is often formed in relation, in realization, and in retaliation to others. That is, beyond simply adapting to stay relevant within society, beyond simply coping. But rather, interactions could also mean that they're training together to negotiate and to come to an agreement, to learn and to unlearn, a call and response. It's a feedback loop. It may seem odd, but several areas in the city seem to have certain coded ways of inquiring whether you belong or if you belong there. This can be adjusted through sustained engagements and appropriating spaces to diversify the way it is used, the way also keeping spaces dynamic, activated, and always slightly unpredictable. A quick side note on note-taking. Although due to its empirical structure, it bears a passing resemblance to anthropological methodologies, but it is in fact deeply feminist. It's a practice of recording personal, political, and social histories as dissident aesthetics. However, the irony of how it may be flipped on its head is not entirely lost on me either. There is some hidden comedy and dangers in seeing myself as this informal hobby ethnographer, making notes about society and attempting to arrive at human behavior from a very limited and superficial condition. Irony of how, say for instance, here in Finland, this brown woman observing a largely white society is making records, archiving the present, creating a timestamp of temporary interactions, however esoteric, is no doubt colored in my own cultural, in my own social and personal experiences. I acknowledge that, resulting in a flawed data set. However, it is also in a small way learning of how spaces can be occupied or mobilized, how they're simply being adapted to or tailored to fit to people around, but the responsibility of which does not lie squarely with the individual or community alone, but rather with a society that demands and the structural powers that must provide. A broken escalator is never completely out of use. It simply becomes a stairway. I'll elaborate on that in a minute. The Poha shopping mall located in Etäkeskus district in Helsinki opened in 1965 and was designed by architect Erkki Karvinen. It was the first and for a very long time after the only shopping mall with escalators outside the building in open air. Some escalators that have now been defunct for a very long time. After 1984, when the newer shopping mall, Itis, opened across the street, the Poha Mall slowly began to lose its customer, which resulted to the mall falling on very hard times in the 1990s. And in the 2000, it started to gather some interest, again, when immigrants started to open multicultural stores in there. Now, there are several stores, bazaars, and halal butchers in Pohos, which at this point in time makes it the biggest multicultural food and grocery market center in Helsinki. This also brings many people of immigrant background, well, mostly men, but they come there to hang out in the mall, visibly and simply spending time with their friends and companions. The shopping mall that is now in a drastic need of renovation for those of you who have visited it. With the future of the mall that is uncertain, since in 2022, next year, all the leases will come to an end and the owner, the city of Helsinki, would rather reuse the grounds to build flats and are reluctant to renew current contracts with the small and big businesses there. It remains to be seen if it stays home for the stores and bazaars that there are now, or what happens to it. But if the state of the escalator has anything to tell us, is that if this escalator were to be in a white neighborhood of the city, it perhaps would have been repaired and cared for. Its steadily declining condition is a testament of how public spaces, when occupied by immigrants or minorities, may completely fall out of grace and funding for its upkeeps by the planning authorities, which is cut, and that also makes it feel as if the occupants are responsible for the neighborhood's upkeep and debilitating conditions, thus further legitimizing the evictions, which also keeps white locals slightly fearful of the area and then also the other. Whereas this right here, this exact homegrownness of the neighborhood could also become an opportunity for the city to celebrate this obvious diversity, as it does with the annual Pohos festival, which is great, by the way, and it is happening in August soon. So if any of you who are in the city and would like to visit, I would recommend and encourage it. But then it also has to go beyond these pop-up festivals. A lot can be said about this, but I hope this would explain for what I see as a generative coexistence, an argument for co-adaptability. Co-adaptability of common spaces and the range of potentiality that a space could offer. A broken escalator can never completely be out of use. It simply becomes a stairway. Thank you so much for your attention and your time.
Wow, thank you so, so much. This has been, thank you so much, Shubhangi. This has been amazing and so, so, so nice to watch. Thank you for showing this work to us. I really liked how, we managed to see so many different perspectives of what spaces mean, starting from vulnerability and resistance to finally this image of the escalator and the coexistence and co-adaptability of diverse futures. So thank you very much again.
Really, thank you so much as well. Really looking forward to Brenda.
Yeah. Now I'm also like super curious, like what is Brenda going to talk about? So maybe we can just introduce her quickly. So she's called Brenda Vértiz Márquez, and she's a design practitioner and also a doctoral student at Aalto University. In the last decade, she's been very interested in exploring the possibilities and limits of how participatory and transformative methods can advance creative explorations, socioeconomic inclusion, and public imagination. And now currently she's working on a project that goes about spatial justice, feminist approaches to design, and also in the social reproduction of exclusion in civic and urban life. So Brenda, please, the floor is yours. We're looking forward to listen from you as well.
Well, thank you very much. Muchas gracias. And Shubhangi, that was like a really powerful presentation. So right now I'm really nervous about my own, but we are sharing like a lot of ideas. So I guess this will be nice and we will have a nice conversation afterwards. So let me just share my screen. And it's going to be also really contrasting because I tend to speak quite fast when I get nervous. So let's see how it goes. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay. Can you see it? Yes? Okay. Let me just do something. Wait a bit. Yeah. Let me just look at the time. Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really excited about this. So I entitled my presentation, Making, Taking, and Reproducing a Space. So let's start. I'm just going to give a brief introduction to the presentation so we can kind of have the same context in our heads. So we know that cities are more powerful than ever. That's a picture of Mexico City. But we also know that they are becoming more unequal. And that's also a picture of Mexico City, of an area called Santa Fe, where the poor neighborhoods are side by side with the wealthier ones. This is since the 1980s, the ascendance of neoliberal economic policies, whose objective or main objective has been the profit accumulation, has exacerbated this uneven urbanization, which is basically caused the improvement of the urban life conditions of the few at the expense of the many. And this uneven urbanization has been or is really intense in cities in the global south. However, it's also happening in other cities in the world. This is an image of news in ULE that it's the part of the report of a think tank that has just said that Finland, the poor areas in Finland are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. So this uneven capitalist urbanization is visible in many sites and landscapes of everyday life, but I will focus here specifically on one of the most relevant, that is public space, and in Mexico City. So what is happening in public space? Well, public space has been, in a way, in a state of crisis, as some academics has called it, in which we have seen how public spaces has been privatized and lost, enclosure and deteriorated, and how they have been shrinkage and eroded. But a very often overlooked space in times of crisis is the public spaces for play. Urban geographer Cindy Katz has said that, for instance, public spaces for play suffer disproportionately in times of crisis compared with other aspects of urban life, that open space, recreation, and contact with nature all seem to be expendable luxuries when compared with schools, clinics, etc. So public spaces for play are a really important part and an essential part of children's lives, and they are really important for children development. In Mexico City, the population of children is of 5 million children in the metropolitan area. That's approximately the total population of countries like Singapore or Finland. And in the Mexico City proper, there is a population of 2,003,000 children that live there. It's like the population of central Paris. So what is happening in Mexico City? Well, children's presence on city outdoor public spaces has significantly decreased, as well as their opportunities to play outside. So why is this happening? Well, there are some factors that are causing this disappearance of children from public spaces. Among those factors are, of course, the uneven distribution and access of public spaces, the deterioration of these public spaces due to the cuts on public resources, for instance, and a really important one is the car-centric model of Mexico City. Mexico City is designed for cars, and there's like a lot of spaces for traffic, and there's a lack of pedestrian infrastructure as well. And the last one, of course, and also really important, is violence, the perceived and the real violence in public spaces. Children are really afraid of being outside, of traffic, of strangers. So yeah, we are pushing children outside of public spaces and keeping them locked inside, let's say. Mexico City is a really hostile space for children. And if we think about the uneven distribution, for instance, of green areas, we can see the division that exists in Mexico City. While in boroughs like Miguel Hidalgo, there are 40 square meters per person. In other boroughs, in the Iztapalapa borough, there are only 6 square meters per person. And paradoxically, it's in this borough where the greatest concentration of children is. In Iztapalapa, they live 550,000 children, which is, again, just to make a comparison and to scale it, it's like the population of Helsinki. And this area has a really high marginalization levels. So it's not only about the distribution of spaces, it's about the quality of those spaces, right? In poor neighborhoods, we have public spaces for play, such as the one in the left side, and then in wealthier neighborhoods, there are spaces like the one in the right side. So the people that are working on these kinds of projects are all the time asking, like, how might we contribute to counteract this constant pushing out children from public spaces in Mexico City? Some approaches that have been taken in Mexico City towards this rescuing of the public spaces is tactical urbanism. Tactical urbanism is this approach that intends to mobilize people from below to propose immediate ways of recuperating these public spaces. And it emerged in New York, let's say, from or within a context of northern Western cities. It has an approach of like a do-it-yourself, guerrilla, grassroots, and participatory approach. But of course, there has this tactical urbanism has faced like a lot of criticisms. And in Mexico, although we are not kind of really taking this example, there are some followers that are considering tactical urbanism as the ideal practice for repurposing, making and reproducing public spaces. What we can see in these pictures is like the typical image of what tactical urbanism can do. And it's really interesting that these initiatives are happening most of the times in the central areas of cities. And they are also kind of like not addressing issues of class and inequality. So I was thinking when I was starting to develop this project, what about taking spaces for play, considering first doing it in the city's outskirts, and really thinking in our particular urbanization processes in Mexico City and in our own ways of understanding public space there and urban play. In Mexico City, we have these urbanization processes that have have been going along like more Western urbanization processes, but it's called urbanismo popular or popular urbanism. What is urbanismo popular? Urbanismo popular is the gradual urbanization process developed through the direct intervention and participation of the inhabitants of the city, both individually and collectively, rather than through institutional planning and urban design interventions, according to Angela Giglia. So this has caused, for instance, the irregular informal settlements that you can see in many cities around Latin America, and specifically in Mexico City, that look like this. These are colonias populares, or self-built working class, low income neighborhoods. But urbanismo popular tells us like a very, very important thing about Mexico City and its urbanization processes is that Mexico City has a very do-it-yourself ethos already. 60% is self-built, for better and for worse, of course, by its inhabitants. And another thing about urbanismo popular is that women have had a key and a fundamental role in this process. They have worked to obtain the basic services along men, like water, electricity, public infrastructure, housing. And I have a really special connection with this kind of urbanism because my family was part of this movement, and they were actually occupying these informal settlements in the southern part of Mexico City. Popular urbanism has seen the awakening of popular urban movements, especially in 1980, that emerged around Mexico for claiming people's right to housing and better living conditions. So I was thinking, is there a possibility to accommodate play in Mexico City in these colonias populares, considering the uneven urbanization and the injustice of public spaces availability and access, where urban space is characterized for its conditions of long-lasting precarity, and where public space for play is reduced, and where in these neighborhoods where there is like little space left for playgrounds or parks. Well, the project started here in the Laboratorio para la Ciudad, where I was working as a public servant. Laboratorio para la Ciudad was the think tank creative office of Mexico City government. It started in 2013, and it closed in 2011. So I started the project here at the Laboratorio para la Ciudad. So I was thinking, well, if in colonias populares we don't have space to accommodate play, what if we liberate the streets for play there? What if we create these public spaces utilizing the most available public space in these colonias populares? I was thinking we have to consider that in these colonias populares there is a flexible appropriation on the streets, that it's a market, like a street market in Mexico City, that these spaces and the streets are the extension of the household, and on the streets there are these permanent negotiations about who can use the streets or who cannot use the streets at certain moments, for instance. And that picture shows like a goal, how do you call it? I don't know, but the place where you make a goal. And then when you see in the streets of Mexico City that kind of drawing, it signifies that you cannot go with your car because there's a football match happening there. So considering this, we started to develop with like a group of neighbors and with Piatonito, which is the character in the middle of that picture, this project called Piatoniñas and Piatoniños. Piatoniños means something like children that walk. And the project basically consists in creating a series of play streets or experimental public space intervention for play by closing certain streets in Mexico City to motorized traffic, both temporarily and permanently in different colonias populares of Mexico City, but specifically in places where there is a high level of marginalization, where there are no open spaces, green area, or parks, for instance, or playgrounds where children can play, and when there are many children. So we, the Piatoniños, we took the symbol of the Mexican luchador or the Mexican wrestler, and we think about ourselves as the defenders of space of justice, who want to create these spaces where we can play freely in the streets, and to create these spaces and liberate them from cars. But mostly to produce this playful interruption that breaks with everyday routines of a car-centric, child-unfriendly Mexico City. We started by visibilizing which areas were the ones that were lacking public spaces for play, that had like a lot of children, and that had high marginalization levels. And then we started with this impulse, almost existential impulse of doing something. And as Henri Lefebvre has said, most importantly, we wanted to find a space of play in the urban environment, understanding play as a non-alienating human activity available to all. We wanted to make outdoor play a thing for everything. We wanted to see outdoor play as something that shouldn't be a luxury reserved for the few. I'm going to skip that, but not only for children, but for like all people, including adults, particularly in cities now, when play is seen as losing time or as a childish impulse in this society in which you have to be all the time producing some kind of economic value. So we think we need to defend our right to play. So we started to close like a lot of streets in Mexico City temporarily first, and then we thought about them as a rehearsal of the future, like an in-between of spaces of political action. And then we started to make them permanently. We closed streets permanently in the Iztapalapa borough with the help of the municipal government. But then the main question as we move forward with the project was, how do we sustain these Peatoninos spaces? How do we sustain these play streets? We did like a lot of play streets, and this is like just of diagram of 13 play streets that we did, and the type of engagement that we had in each of them. The bigger the circle, the bigger the engagement of the neighbors, of the public institution, of the territorial alliances, let's say, or the neighbors. And we focus on these areas, as you can see, where there are like a lot of marginalization, where the marginalization level is really high. There are like a lot of children and no green areas. And we started to think that for every work of production, of producing a play street, there is like an invisible work of reproduction, like all the care work or the everyday solidarity, the community building, all that hidden work that forges friendships, nourishes trust, instills hope, all that work is essential to maintain these play streets. And this is part of what we are working now with Peatoninos on having not only to deal with the production of the play street, but we deal with the social reproduction, but from a feminist perspective, because this kind of care work of solidarity and community building is not infinite. It needs to be replenished. So how are we going to replenish all that care that we are using to produce these community bonds, to produce all this play? So now we are kind of like approaching the production of the play streets through feminist social reproduction theory framework, both from the global north and from the global south. These are just some examples of the approaches that we are following with the project right now. Right now, with Peatoninas and Peatoninos, and as Gladys Tzutzul, a Guatemalan sociologist, points out, we want to work towards understanding how public space for play is produced and reproduced from the point of view of women and children, that is, from a social reproduction point of view. And we want to expose the work of reproduction, especially in societies that are organized in context of extreme vulnerability. We are continuously questioning ourselves if these interventions are actually contributing to change things, or if they are only helping to cope with them. If we are promoting the adaptation to the conditions produced by uneven capitalist urbanization process without really counteracting them. We are questioning the assumption that participation is a synonymous of democracy. Peatoninos has had different objectives in different times. We have had communal objectives, institutional objectives, and pedagogical objectives. On my side, I believe that feminist social reproduction framework and play can be used to explore and brainstorm ways of reproducing and sustaining these interventions. And they can be helpful in exploring questions of social inequality, and a really important point, questions of class differences, which are really rarely addressed within participatory urban practices. So this is me, and these are some of the children and some of the people that were collaborating with Piatto Niños in the picture of the right. We were in the bike forum, in the International Bike Forum, and we were there presenting the project in this luchador arena. And that's me, another picture on the left when I was like 3 or 2 years old. And it's really funny to me. And I always like to finish with this, because I was a luchador when I was like a child, and I continue to be a luchadora still in 2021. So thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Brenda. That was so cool. It was such a lovely end also. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. The project was so interesting. I also love the name Piatto Niños.
Thank you.
Yeah, so cool. I see a lot of clapping hands from the audience. There's also some comments in the chat. Yeah.
That was wonderful, Brenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I do have a question. So if that's all right, I could just start off and then we can discuss. And
Please.
at any point, please just weave in and out. I was thinking of the class differences when you were talking about, and that was very poignant to me, because even in my conversation about loitering, there's this conversation about class and who can afford to be a loiterer as resistance is very important, even between people, movements like action movements where Blank Noise and Girls at Tabas are always addressing this and are always trying to navigate this. They're never out of this conversation, and which is why I wanted to put this across to you as well, because even with loitering, you can, if somebody who has, say, 2 jobs and have to go back home to look after their children, they cannot be a flaneur, like this Parisian man venturing out with a cane stick, just admiring the city and the sights, is not possible if you have 2 jobs and children to go take care of and house to take care of. So this act of loitering and talking about leisure and the streets, I think is it's deeply embedded in class, and we cannot separate the two. I completely understand. And even in this case of play, I feel like you are addressing class in that sense. But then my question would be, how do you negotiate with that? Because yes, the idea of addressing it is one thing, but how do you even work towards including everybody? Because I think inclusion is difficult. Addressing is easier. Acknowledging it is maybe in these cases easier than actual action of inclusion. And I think in the case of, say, Blank Noise, where they did invite women to take a nap, I think it took a lot of multi-network resource to do that, asking different organizations, women action groups to do it in order to be visible throughout. And they sometimes do it over a span of 1 day or 2 days. It's a call saying today is the day that we come out and meet to sleep. So I feel like it takes a lot of, and it's not just something that happens naturally where you can loiter always. So I don't know how to negotiate exactly with the idea of including beyond acknowledging, where I know it is possible and I know it happens, but I'm wondering how you address that in your work or your research.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why I finished with that part with that statement in the presentation, because for us with this project, it has been really tough in that sense that when you have and when you are working with people that has to spend 4 hours in the public transport and then every day, and then they have to take care of like so many things during the day, and then if you kind of organize a play street together, then the simple idea of kind of recognizing that the energy levels, for instance, like make it like a really simple thing, are different, right? Because you have rested, you have eaten well, you don't have to, you didn't took a 4-hour journey to get there. So what we have done in that sense is that we have engaged people in different levels according to these issues, for instance, within a neighborhood. And we are trying to articulate this kind of class struggles that are present within the neighborhood. And we are also engaging, and this might be an important part to discuss, because I also want to talk with you about this, like how do you address the public institutions, and how do you address the private funding, for instance, when you are also dealing with these kinds of projects, and when you are trying to articulate this kind of initiatives. And my answer will be that at this point we are trying to develop these different types of engagement based first on visualizing that, yeah, there are these issues, and then there is this class struggle that we are observing within the project. We are discussing that openly, and how we organize the play street based on that, on acknowledging this first. But then how we organize this it's really based on that discussion. It's really based on that discussion, because from that point on, then we decide what to do collectively. And perhaps there has been a moment when in a play street, for instance, that people are just really waiting for some of us to do everything, and then it's difficult to kind of deal with that process, because you have this idea, yeah, well, maybe this is not what we are aiming to, or maybe this is not the way, but yeah, we are discovering this. And I think what we are doing is sustaining this project, and we are staying there with the trouble, and we are not leaving. At least in some of these play streets. Yeah, but I don't know if I answered your question, or yeah, if I was just,
I think you did,
moving all around.
I think you did.
Mm.
There is a question that Raul is putting through.
Yeah, he says that he has difficulties talking about these problems back home, especially with the locals, because of the interplay of the following two aspects. In the local context, I sense a lot of prejudice and lack of information about the global South. Most of the opinions are based on what the 2 or 3 hegemonic media outlets in Finland print. And following from one, I feel that without the proper context, I end up feeding the stereotypes already present in here in a process of self-exoticization of myself and the region. Given your backgrounds, do you feel familiar with this phenomena? If so, how do you cope with it?
Would you like to go first, Brenda?
Yeah, sure. Raúl, I guess you are from a country from the south, based on your name. Sorry for my prejudice there. So, yeah, I think from my own experience, it's also, I have realized that it's really easy to follow the path of just getting the information that it's given to us from this Western hegemonic media sources. So from my experience, I really realized that, yeah, it's easier to do that, but we actually have like a lot of materials coming from the spaces and the places where we live. The thing is that they are not out, they are not as visible as the other ones. So I have really tried to go deep into that, into those resources. And I if you revise my presentation, I only use, let's say, like 2 Western-based references. One was Henry Lefebvre, and then the other one was from Hendricks, but then the rest of them are from women from the global south, and I think, or from the so-called global south. So I think that's really important, that we have to work on that and put them out there, because they are there. Yes, and I also feel like this self-exotization, and it's something that I'm constantly struggling with. Like, I don't know if, for instance, right now I'm talking too loud and I'm being like really colorful, and I'm like kind of like this, and I'm just like thinking like, is this is this who I am, or is this something that I want to just reflect? But I think this is who I am. And then there's also like this struggle, especially when you are kind of like jumping from country to country, as I have been doing. So my advice would be like, just keep your feet like well grounded and try to talk with people outside academia, and try to talk with people that are actually like just living their normal regular lives, and that's it, because in there things are quite different as they are portrayed in academia or in these hegemonic media sources.
I can take the second question, and then that might even weave into the first. For me, I feel like from an artistic culture working background that I am in, especially in Finland, I think it is at more nascent stage than, say, a lot of other countries, where I think there is a constant, I think people are dueling with the idea of acknowledging you as a minority and exoticizing you. So there's a constant struggle between them, where even the support comes as a form of patronizing sometimes. And it's something that a lot of people and institutions are not aware of. So in my case, I have, at least in recent times, been countering that in very small ways. For instance, like somewhere was recently published for a work of mine, there were a few other people whose works were published, and then mine said, a non-white woman is working on this, which is a totally fine thing to say. I think they're doing it in support of the fact that they have supporting my work. But at the same time, what I think is missed out is the fact that it is a very easy bandage to some sort of like larger problem, a guild. So I try to counter it by asking, anytime somebody wants to work with me, I try to ask them, say, hey, it's not you personally. I just want to know why you want to work with me. I'd like to know, is it just because I am your token? Am I filling some spots for you? Am I the brown woman that makes your institution feel all right, or like the work list feel all right? So it also helps me understand why it is that my work is relevant within the scope of some curatorial background. And I think it is a helpful thing, not just for me, for them also to realize that if it is just an easy guilt problem, I cannot supply that. I think it is going to be a more difficult question than that. And we'll have to understand the complication, and it's not as easy as just saying that, hey, we just funded a non-white brown woman and problem solved, hey, done, check. It can't be that easy. So instead of that, I would ideally like to complicate it by just saying, obscure me. What my work is going to be nothing but who I am. So even without using these identities, any work, if I'm making these anecdotes, don't mention who I am. For instance, let's try it. Don't mention these easily accessed identities, and just say, hey, artist is publishing this work. And how can my work be anything but? Or how can the production of what I do anything but who I am or from my experiences? So why are these easy identities required? And I think this also weaves into the first question that you asked, Rahul, which is if by production of more work coming from other ways, we are also feeding or countering the dominant narrative by creating these sub-narratives that may not exist. And of course, it is not going to tip the scale entirely. It's not possible. It's too heavy. But at some point, it kind of creates some disturbances, or it creates some interruptions in this idea of how before Instagram and Facebook, we would only know what is happening in Palestine and Israel from one perspective, I imagine. Now, the fact that we have Twitter and Instagram, and we are hearing narratives that would have been impossible 15 years ago. And this is creating ruptures where institutions are being made to acknowledge or bring solidarity, which would have been absolutely, like they would have been, they could have gone and gotten a nice night's sleep without any accountability.
Thank you both so much. I received a question from the chat that I just want to bring up before we're almost running out of time, but yeah, obviously there's so much to talk about. The question I got from Cecil in the chat was about, Brenda, in your introduction, you stated that cities are powerful. And so the question is around what makes cities powerful and what you meant by defining it as such. And maybe I'll just weave in one of my own questions as well, because just from the discussion that we had before this event, we also discussed the title of the event, Making Space, Taking Space. And I think we had a really interesting discussion around, you know, these power structures there as well, like, you know, who allows the making of space and the taking of space. And so yeah, I was wondering if you both maybe wanted to just speak a little bit on that.
So what I meant that about saying that cities are powerful is that cities and urban areas, let's say, are concentrating a lot of resources, economic resources. They are also like concentrating a lot of people, actually, especially like these mega regions or mega cities like Mexico City or other mega regions in the global south. They are concentrating a lot of let's say, exchange power and exchange value. So in that sense, that's what I meant when I said that cities are powerful, and they are concentrating power, economic resources, natural resources that are outside cities are coming into cities. So that's also what I meant by using that statement. Although I know having this city center vision is not that appropriate, because there are things outside cities, but in that sense, and urban areas, let's say, but in that sense, these agglomerations of urban infrastructure, people, resources are concentrating a lot of power, capital, etc. So yeah, that's what I meant. And then was there another thing?
Henriette's question about taking and making space that we were discussing. Maybe I can start, and Brenda, you could fill some gaps. I think when we were first discussing about taking space, I was wondering if, making space, yeah, we were discussing making space, and I was wondering if that is a little bit grandiose on our part to say that, hey, we are in this position of making space for anybody. Whereas when especially I was thinking from the perspective that nobody, like the women that I speak of who are doing these actions, are in absolutely no need for a savior, or like not just a savior, like they don't need no one to make any space for them. They are very well capable of creating these spaces or reclaiming spaces for themselves without any assistance but their own selves, collectively, of course, not individually. But I was just thinking that if we are making space, maybe we can also claim for ourselves to be taking space, and that helps. Then we are facilitating, say, for instance, for me, then Feminist Futures becomes a space that is making it, whereas, say, Brenda and I would be taking it. And that, I feel, then becomes a fairly hegemonically, I feel more centered, rather than it being in one place and not the other. So for me, having this title helped with the way power worked, or as power is viewed and experienced.
Yes, well, I think it's as you were saying, and for me, I think I was thinking about the title after we talked and decided this talk was going to be was going to use this title, and then I was thinking, like, for me, it depends on who's taking and who's making. Yeah, and both things, like who's making this kind of playful spaces that some children are able to use and then some other are not able to use. Who's taking those spaces, who's taking those streets to build a different kind of space for children. So yeah, it depends on who's making and who's taking and for what purposes. So yeah.
Just quickly, I agree, but there was this one thing that I was thinking, which is, especially in the context of my work, which is like artistically discussing anecdotes from observing the streets. It's just one human, that is me, and I am making no space, or I make no claim for making space for a community or individuals or people who's just not me, one entity walking around taking notes. All I can do is stand my ground and resist in the smallest, tiniest way that my body can accommodate. Like I see my, like there's a cardboard cutout sometimes of your body, and you just like move through it in a cardboard or like a plywood. And I just see myself as that in like streets sometimes. Like there's just like one tiny Shubhangi sized cut out, and I'm just like that with a notebook, and that's it. That's all the whole I have. I have no more holes, nothing, no hands. It's just literally that one tiny space and nothing else.
Well, yeah, I could continue, but I think it's we're running out of time. But I just want to say that for me, it's really difficult to think about myself in that sense of being like one entity, particularly in this kind of project. It's really difficult. And I think about myself in relation to the other people that are working towards this kind of project. So it's really interesting how this these ideas, I think they complement each other, but yeah, it's really hard for me to think in that sense of this person that it's just there, because I have to think, or I couldn't think about myself in that sense, that I don't have these other people and these other things and these other entities around to create this kind of interventions. Yeah,
for sure. It's in relationality.
yes,
we exist around. We live in the public. But this has been a really nice talk, Brenda. Thank you. I learned a lot from you.
No, and me, I was just like really so thank you very much to you.
Thank you, Henriette, Eva, Nitin. Thank you so much for
thank you both
for organizing this and giving us the space to have a chat. Yeah.
No, we're the ones who are very, very thankful.
Thank you for being here, and thank you, Henriette, Eva, Nitin.
Eva, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, so another big thank you. This has been like a pleasure to have you here, and I think everybody enjoyed it very much. All these conversations, they have been really touching and really important.